Why did the guards tense up the moment she reached for her ID, yet still couldn't see who she really was? Long before her name would echo through the corridors of Fort Henderson, Sarah had mastered the art of walking unnoticed through places where she held more authority than anyone in the room. Civilian clothes gave her an invisibility that uniforms never could. The weight of her orders pressed quietly against the leather lining of her handbag, but nothing in her posture hinted at rank, command, or history. She looked like any traveler coming in from a long night flight. Calm eyes, collected breath, the soft creases of fatigue at the corners of her expression. The checkpoint ahead looked tired. That was the first warning sign. Not sloppy in a chaotic sense, no alarms blaring, no visible danger, but tired in spirit. The flag above the gate should have been sharp and ceremonial at sunrise, but it caught the wind with lazy folds. The security booth window reflected the sky more than the soldiers inside, and somewhere deeper in the base, a truck engine rumbled without urgency. She had not come here to catch them failing. Yet everything about this arrival, from the wrinkled uniforms to the inattentive conversation drifting from the checkpoint, revealed exactly why she'd been sent. People only ignored details when they'd stopped believing details mattered. She slowed, not for effect but to take it in, boots not military, steps silent, hair tied back in a plain ponytail, blouse neat but not pressed like dress uniform linens. She saw cigarette butts near the curb where none should ever be. A laminated sign meant to welcome visitors was faded and cracked at the corners. The guardhouse blinds were half open, uneven, like curtains in a teenager's room. How does a place this large lose its edge so quietly? She'd been briefed about low morale, slipping standards, and leadership fractures, but reports weren't the same as air you could smell. The atmosphere here carried resignation, like everyone inside had once cared, then got tired of being the only ones who did. She stepped into their line of sight. They didn't notice. Private Johnson was mid-sentence, laughing about something minor, his boots crossed at the ankles. Sergeant Williams sipped his coffee like sunrise wasn't part of duty. Neither man even glanced up when she reached the edge of the window. Not anger, not offense, just quiet confirmation. The moment she spoke, just a calm "excuse me," they reacted as if they'd been startled from a dream. It shouldn't have taken words to gain their attention. A real gate guard should have seen her 30 paces out. Eyes first, questions later. Private Johnson turned, brows pinched, not out of respect but inconvenience. He didn't stand. He didn't salute. He didn't recognize anything beyond appearance. Sarah simply waited, patient as stone, her breath steady enough to hide the mild ache from yesterday's travel. She placed her ID and transfer orders on the countertop not like a demand, but like she'd done it 1,000 times in 1,000 different ways. He picked them up with one hand, the other still nursing his coffee. Some people see a name, a rank, and a seal, and understand the world just shifted. He didn't. His confusion wasn't malicious, it was cultural. This was a base that didn't expect excellence to walk through the front gate. She watched the shift in his eyes only when the rank registered, Colonel. Then the doubt surfaced before the respect. Civilian clothes, no formal escort, no warning. His uncertainty fed his inexperience, and uncertainty rarely produces the right instinct. "I'm going to need to verify this with my supervisor," he muttered, not to her but to the papers. Sergeant Williams finally looked up, not from discipline, from curiosity. Rank lives in presence, not fabric, yet neither man instinctively stepped into proper posture. The pause between realization and action was a silence she'd heard in many troubled commands. It was the sound of standards that had been sleeping too long. She gave them room to process. She could have flashed authority like a weapon, but impatience only teaches fear. She had not come here to terrify, she had come here to lead. Williams disappeared inside the booth, speaking into a phone. The tone shifted from dismissive to cautious, then to alarmed respect. She heard none of the other end of the call, but she didn't need to. His shoulders told the story. Meanwhile, Private Johnson kept staring at her like a puzzle he wasn't sure belonged to any box he'd ever opened. Civilians, to him, came for visitor passes or deliveries, not command. When Williams returned, his voice was quieter, palms suddenly empty. "Ma'am, it appears there was a communication error. Headquarters confirms." But before the apology fully formed, Private Johnson cut in with the kind of confidence only ignorance produces. "I don't care what anyone said. You can't enter this base out of uniform. Civilians need special clearance." Silence fell hard. Williams shot him a look, panicked, embarrassed, but the damage was alive. Sarah studied the private not with anger but with the focus of someone identifying the shape of a problem. This wasn't insubordination born today. This was the outcome of weeks, months, maybe years of weak guidance. Young soldiers don't invent dysfunction, they absorb it. She didn't raise her voice. She reached calmly for her phone and dialed the number of someone who would move mountains with a word. Her tone remained courteous, but the clarity of command cut through every syllable. "This is Colonel Martinez at the front gate. An escort to headquarters, please. Yes, now." Both guards heard her. That was intentional. In those minutes of waiting, she saw everything she needed to see. The clutter inside the booth, the outdated logs, the missing protocol binder, the scuffed flooring, the coffee cups where weapon cleaning kits should have been. A base doesn't decay in a week. Culture rots slowly. Private Johnson's confidence drained from his face as realization crashed through his bravado. William stood at attention now, though late, his jaw tight with the sting of embarrassment. She didn't shame them, she simply gave them truth. When your chain of command verifies someone's identity, that is the end of any personal doubt, she told them gently. Respect is not optional because understanding is incomplete. No flourish, no anger, just wait. The black sedan arrived minutes later. The officers inside saw everything before exiting. The crisp salutes they offered her were not performative, they were reflexive. The acting commander and a sergeant major approached, their posture a portrait of regret and urgency. Apologies followed more than she needed. What mattered wasn't the inconvenience, it was the diagnosis. She stopped the disciplinary cascade before it crushed the two guards, not because they deserved nothing, but because they weren't the origin of the failure. Command had allowed cracks to form long before she ever stepped onto the tarmac. When she asked to speak privately with the senior officers, she guided the narrative away from execution and toward accountability with purpose. "This is not a private's failure," she said. "This is a symptom of leadership erosion. If you break them to prove a point, you'll fix nothing." In the car that followed, silent escorts slicing through quiet streets inside the base, she saw everything her reports hadn't shown her. Uniforms out of regulation, vehicles dusty from neglect, a motor pool with more idle mechanics than turning wrenches, housing areas with peeling paint, a medical clinic entrance where staff chatted in sneakers and half-tucked shirts. She didn't frown, she absorbed. Leaders often confuse decay with defiance, but decay is passive. It creeps when no one is looking. Fort Henderson wasn't defiant, it was tired. Once inside headquarters, the veneer of order didn't fool her. Even the polished floors echoed footsteps like they hadn't heard real authority in years. When she entered what would now be her office, the files on the desk were stacked without care, the blinds uneven, the desk blotter peeling at the corners. This was not neglect. This was resignation disguised as routine. She didn't sit right away. She stood at the massive window and watched personnel walk by below, hands in pockets, laughter without awareness, heads down, eyes empty of urgency. No one looked at the flagpole. The acting commander spoke first, his tone halfway between apology and explanation. He mentioned staff turnover, prior leadership styles, resource gaps. She listened, but didn't let sympathy dull clarity. Low morale is never the first stage of collapse, it's the aftermath. She requested a full department head meeting at 800 the next morning, not because schedules demanded it, but because tone does. She would begin not with punishment, but with truth and with standards. Then she made a quieter decision, one no one else heard. Every soldier who set foot past that gate would eventually feel the shift she intended to create, not through intimidation, but through restoration. Standards weren't weapons. They were promises, and promises had been broken here long before she arrived. Later, when the sun dipped low and the shadows of buildings stretched across the base, she moved through corridors with the privacy of someone no one had yet learned to watch. She passed staff who barely glanced up. She passed bulletin boards layered with outdated notices. She passed a training schedule 2 weeks behind. She paused only once, in front of a mirror along a hallway near the officer's wing. She looked at herself, not out of vanity but recognition. She did not look like the base expected her to. Good. Assumptions often build their own cages. That night in the office she'd inherit, she sat alone and opened a worn leather journal she'd carried through 3 commands and a lifetime of lessons. She didn't write speeches. She wrote truths. The first sentence landed slowly, deliberate as a breath held too long. When a gate forgets who it protects, it is not the gate that failed first. She closed the book, set it on the desk, and exhaled once through her nose. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. And no one here yet understood how far change could reach when it walked in quietly, without uniform, and refused to leave. Why did the first knock on her office door sound more like hesitation than respect? She hadn't been in the room an hour before someone decided they needed to explain themselves, not out of duty, out of fear, subtle, restrained, but present in the rhythm of the knock. 3 taps, a pause, then one more, like the sound carried its own apology. She didn't answer right away. Silence, she'd learned, could do more work than words. The second knock was firmer, less uncertain. Only then did she say, "Enter." Major Harrison stepped inside with the stiffness of a man who had spent years compensating for other people's failures. His uniform was flawless, but his eyes weren't. They held a kind of tired readiness, as though he'd been patching leaks for so long he no longer believed in dry floors. "Ma'am," he said, standing at parade rest, "I wanted to personally apologize again for—" "You've already apologized," Sarah cut in gently. "I don't need another one. What I need is honesty." He blinked, not in offense, in surprise. Honesty wasn't often requested. It was usually extracted. She gestured to the chair in front of her desk, but didn't sit herself. He took the seat cautiously, as though it might be a test. In a way, it was. "You've been acting commander during this transition," she said. "You didn't create this situation, but you've been living in it. So tell me, what broke first?" Harrison shifted slightly, not out of discomfort, but the instinctive reluctance of a man expected to defend rather than reveal. She waited. Finally, he spoke. It started small. One commander let a standard slide because they didn't want to fight a battle over it. Then another did the same. After that, people got used to not being corrected or held accountable. After a while, no one wanted to be the one to bring the hammer down, so no one did. "No inspections?" she asked. "Not thorough ones. And when there were, they were treated like check-the-box exercises. The previous co thought tightening discipline would hurt morale." Sarah absorbed that. The road to failure is often paved with people avoiding discomfort. "What about the senior NCOs?" she asked. "We lost some of the strong ones before the decline got obvious. Replacements weren't mentored. They blended into whatever norms they found." "And communication?" she asked. Harrison laughed once, dry and low. "If information makes it from one end of this base to the other, it's by accident. Nothing moves the way it should." She nodded, then finally sat. "What happened with those 2 gate guards wasn't surprising," she said. "It was inevitable." He didn't disagree. She leaned forward, elbows on the desk. Tomorrow morning, every department head will meet me here. I don't want reports. I want truths. And I want every one of them to understand we're not starting with blame. We're starting with rebuilding. You think they'll cooperate? Harrison asked. They will, she said, one way or another. He hesitated, then asked the question that had been hovering above the base like fog. Are you planning to remove people, ma'am? She answered without flinching. If necessary, but I'd rather fix the foundation than replace the roof. Harrison nodded slowly, respect growing in the places fatigue had carved out. When he left, she didn't rest, she walked. Evening had given way to night, and most lights on base had dimmed. The silence wasn't peace, it was habit. Lights out early not because of discipline, but because no one expected anything to happen worth staying awake for. She moved along the main corridor of HQ, heels silent on polished tile. Her steps echoed just enough to remind the building it was occupied again. She passed bulletin boards with outdated memos, a trophy case with dust where pride used to sit. Portraits of past commanders lined the walls, half of them bearing eyes that once believed they left a legacy. The other half probably never tried. She didn't pause under any of their faces. Outside, the air held the cool sting of late evening. The base was wide and quiet, streetlights humming, barracks windows dim, footsteps few. She watched a pair of soldiers walk past chatting with hands in pockets, unaware anyone was observing. Another sign. People act differently when they believe someone is watching. Tonight, they didn't believe. She wandered without rush, past the silent motor pool, where silhouettes of transport trucks sat like unspoken obligations, past the drill fields, where grass had grown half an inch too long and no one cared enough to cut it, past the family quarters, where porch lights flickered and kids' bikes leaned against walls without order. She wasn't judging, she was registering truth. Every sign told the same quiet story. No one had expected change to arrive. By the time she returned to her office, the clock's hands sat close to midnight. Sleep could wait. She lived through nights far harsher than this, under fire, in desert wind, with enemy radios crackling just beyond hearing. Quiet administrative crisis. That was manageable. She wrote until her fingers stilled. Not dossiers, not speeches, frameworks, questions, patterns of failure, entry points for repair. She could see, almost like a map, where to press first. People didn't fail because they were weak. They failed because no one bothered to show them how to stand. By dawn, she had a plan. But before the sun crested the edge of the horizon, before uniforms were donned and coffee poured and duty rosters checked, she found herself somewhere she hadn't planned on going, the barracks wing. Not because she needed to, because instincts took her there. The door to the enlisted lounge was slightly ajar. Inside, lights glowed low, and a single soldier sat staring at a muted television. A young corporal, boots unlaced, head leaned back against the couch like someone who'd carried too much of nothing for too long. He didn't notice her right away. When he finally did, he jerked upright, scrambling to pull his boots together. At ease, she said softly. He froze, eyes wide, unsure whether that command even applied to whoever she was. What time do you report? She asked. 6:30, ma'am, he said, still standing, still trying not to panic. Get some rest before then, she told him. Tired soldiers don't think clearly. He nodded quickly, swallowing hard. She didn't ask his name. Not yet. She didn't need to. He was one of many like him, carrying the weight of no guidance, no structure, no pride. She stepped past him and left him staring after her, clearly aware he just encountered someone different. The morning rose sharp and bright. She showered, dressed in uniform for the first time since arriving, and let the insignia speak what her presence already had. When she stepped into HQ at 7:45, people noticed. Posture straightened, voices lowered, office doors opened. Her name passed in whispers before she said a word. By 800, the room meant for department heads was full. Some officers sat stiff and stoic, some irritated, some curious, some masking fear under professionalism. She stood at the head of the table, not behind it. No notes, no slides, no lectern. "I'm not here to give a speech," she began. "I'm here to give direction." No one moved. "This base is not failing because of lack of resources," she continued. "It's failing because standards became negotiable, communication became optional, leadership became reactive instead of present." A few glances exchanged, some guilt, some deflection. "I'm not interested in who to blame," she said. "I'm interested in who's willing to rebuild." Silence held until someone had to break it. Major Keller, logistics, a man who'd once believed in order but had learned to survive on improvisation. "And if someone isn't willing, ma'am?" he asked. She didn't blink. "Then they'll be replaced by someone who is." No threat, just truth. "Today, every department begins audit and restoration," she said. "Not paperwork, presence. I'll be visiting every section myself, not for inspection, for understanding." Eyes widened, some drew in quiet breaths. She continued, "Your soldiers don't need lectures, they need leadership they can see." Then she let the silence work, the kind that lands like a marker in the ground. When the meeting ended, no one walked out with the same posture they'd walked in with. Some carried hope, others carried dread, all carried awareness. And somewhere across the base, without knowing why, people already felt something shift. Not because she shouted, but because someone had finally arrived who didn't plan to leave things as they were. Why did the air feel different the moment she stepped onto the training grounds, like the earth itself was holding its breath? The old parade field lay quiet in the morning light, bordered by faded bleachers and a half-leaning sign that still claimed this was home of the Iron Guard. The slogan might have meant something once. Now it just hung there like a memory no one wanted to take down. Dew clung to the grass where formation lines should have been sharp and worn from use. Instead, the field looked like a place people passed rather than a place they stood with purpose. Sarah didn't walk with an entourage. She didn't announce she was coming. She moved alone across the grounds, her shadow long and deliberate in the early sun. Conversations among soldiers scattered across the yard stuttered and died as she passed. Some knew who she was, some didn't, but uniforms straightened anyway, and hands found their way out of pockets. She didn't stop to acknowledge any of them. Not yet. She was listening, not to words but to habits. A group near the far bleachers was gathered around a stack of equipment crates. None of it was organized. A sergeant, staffed by rank but worn thin by resignation more than time, was checking inventory half-heartedly while two privates scrolled through something on a phone just out of her view. She approached without haste. The sergeant saw her first, and his eyes flicked from surprise to alarm in less than a second. "Ma'am," he said, voice tightening, snapping to something resembling attention. The two privates moved like someone had hit their bodies with a bolt of electricity. One nearly dropped the phone. Sarah didn't look at it. She didn't need to. "What's the schedule for this field today?" she asked, gaze steady on the sergeant. He hesitated, not because he didn't know, but because the truth sounded weak even before it left his mouth. "There's no formal drills this morning, ma'am. No formations. Not until Thursday's readiness block, ma'am." "And today is?" she asked, though she already knew. "Tuesday." She let that hang, not as accusation, just as fact. "Where's your company commander?" she asked. "At headquarters, ma'am. Morning reports." She nodded once, then glanced at the two privates. "Names?" "Private Russo, ma'am." "Private Miller, ma'am." "Either of you in charge of those crates?" "No, ma'am," Russo answered quickly. "Sergeant Blake is." She turned back to the sergeant. "These assigned for inspection today?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Is this your current pace of work?" she asked. "Or just your starting pace?" He swallowed. Current, ma'am. Then consider this your last day moving at it. She didn't raise her voice, but all three men stood straighter, as if the air between her words had its own command. She walked past them, not dismissing them, leaving the silence to teach whatever they chose to hear. From the field, she made her way to the motor pool. If the parade grounds breathed resignation, the motor pool coughed it. Rows of vehicles idled under the gaze of soldiers who had learned to accept broken things. The bay doors hung half open. Tools lay on counters without order. A mechanic in grease-stained sleeves wiped his hands on a rag that looked like it had survived a small war. One of the maintenance leads, a warrant officer with a clipboard tucked under his arm and the expression of someone permanently bracing for bad news, spotted her first. "Ma'am," he said, stepping forward quickly, "we weren't expecting you out here." "I know," she replied. He shifted, adjusting the clipboard against his side. "We've got a work order backlog we're still clearing. The parts delay." She raised a hand once, not to silence him but to redirect him. "Show me the last readiness report," she said. He blinked, hesitated, then gestured for her to follow. Inside the main bay office, the report was taped to a board dated 3 weeks ago. Too old to still matter. Too recent to be an accident. "Who owns updates?" she asked. "I do," he said more quietly. "And why is this still posted?" "No one requested a revised copy, ma'am. We've been waiting on." She let her gaze meet his and held it. Accountability doesn't need volume, it needs presence. "What's the vehicle readiness rate right now?" she asked. 61%, ma'am. "And the minimum acceptable?" 75. She tapped the edge of the board with the back of her knuckle, just once. "You don't wait to be asked for accuracy," she said. "You put truth where everyone can see it." He nodded, jaw tight, not in anger but in the ache of sudden clarity. "Before noon," she said, "I want the updated numbers posted, and I want a list of what it would take to push that number to 85. 85, he echoed. "If you can't exceed the standard," she said, "you're not leading, you're reacting." She moved again. From the motor pool, she crossed to the dining facility. It should have smelled of coffee, starch, and routine. Instead, it smelled faintly of old fryer oil and something vaguely sweet, like syrup left a day too long on a counter. Inside, a corporal at the serving line was laughing with a cook, while a tray of eggs sat under a heat lamp that dimmed instead of preserved. A table near the window still held crumbs from an earlier meal. A supply cart sat abandoned near the beverage station. An older woman in uniform, civilian staff once, enlisted now, pushed into a new role by necessity, noticed her presence like a cold wind. She moved to intercept. "Ma'am, good morning, ma'am. We weren't informed you'd be touring the facility," she said. "Did breakfast end on time today?" Sarah asked. "Yes, ma'am, 0730. "And is someone assigned to sanitation after meals?" "Yes, ma'am, Private Donaldson's on shift." "Would he be able to identify which sanitizing protocol he's using right now?" she asked, glancing at the crumb-covered table. The woman looked at the crumbs, then at Sarah. "No, ma'am," she admitted. "Find out who trained him," Sarah said. The woman nodded and moved quickly. She didn't linger, just let the truth of the moment settle like weight. The housing area came next, families just starting their day. Lawn edges uneven, porch rails peeling, a rusting tricycle leaning against a bench where 2 young kids were squabbling under the half-careful eye of a teenage sibling. She watched the scene from the sidewalk. None of the children noticed her. One of the adults finally did, a young mother carrying laundry in a plastic basket, hair pulled back in a messy knot, eyes tired but alert. The woman paused, then offered a polite nod, not because she recognized Sarah, but because courtesy hadn't entirely died here. Sarah returned the nod. She didn't judge the chipped paint or the litter tucked into the corner of a curb. She noted it, Small signs speak loudly when no one listens. She made her way back toward headquarters as the sun climbed. At 9:45, she stepped into the conference room where senior enlisted leadership had been told to assemble. There were fewer uniforms here than in the officers' meeting, but the stakes were higher. Sergeant Major Thompson stood at the table, spine straight, watching the room fill. Some first sergeants carried themselves with a quiet readiness. Others looked defensive before a single word was spoken. She didn't sit. "When discipline breaks in the ranks," she began, "it's because it broke in the backbone first." Every head lifted. "I've walked your base this morning," she said. "I've seen half-effort treated like routine. I've seen equipment neglected, standards dissolved, and soldiers who no longer remember what pride looks like." Not anger, just truth laid flat. "No one in this room caused all of it," she continued, "but everyone in this room allowed parts of it to grow." Thompson didn't flinch at that. A few others did. She moved closer to the table without touching it. "This afternoon, I want every senior NCO to be in the spaces they own, not the offices they hide in. Your soldiers don't need your signatures. They need your presence." Then she paused, long enough for the room to hear their own breathing. "Leadership isn't a rank," she said quietly. "It's proximity." She let the words land, then stepped back. An older master sergeant with deep creases in his face and a name tape that had survived more than one war spoke up. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "some of us tried. We got shut down so many times we stopped pushing." She held his gaze. "Then today is the last day you stay shut down." He took that in with a nod that carried no defiance, only the faint tremor of hope. When she dismissed the room, no one left casually. Chairs were tucked in, floors were cleared, eyes stayed on her even after she turned away. Outside the conference room, Thompson fell in step beside her. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, "they're not used to being spoken to that directly." "They'll adapt," she said. He glanced at her, a thread of something like respect layered under caution. "And if they do," he asked. "Then we'll build new leaders," she replied, "from the ones who have been waiting for someone to make room." They walked the hallway in silence for a few steps more. Finally, Thompson spoke again. "You think this place can change?" She didn't smile, but something behind her eyes flickered like the first light through storm clouds. "I don't think it," she said. "I intend it." And somewhere across the base, someone who had no idea who she was adjusted their posture without knowing why. Not from command. From atmosphere. What happens when the first crack of change appears before people even realize they're standing on shifting ground? By mid-afternoon, the base had begun to move differently, not quickly, not loudly, but noticeably. The atmosphere wasn't fear, not yet. It was awareness. The kind that makes a soldier check their collar twice before stepping outside. The kind that turns casual strides into measured steps. Sarah didn't fill the day with orders. She filled it with presence. People talk about authority as something spoken, but the truth lives in where a leader walks, watches, and listens without announcement. Her next stop was the communications office. The building looked like it had once been modern, before age and apathy gave it the quiet decay of a forgotten storage unit. Inside, phones rang without urgency. A young specialist flipped through a binder without reading it, and a captain behind a desk was typing something he clearly wasn't invested in. She didn't knock, she stepped inside. The specialist nearly jumped out of his chair at the sight of her uniform and rank. The captain stood quickly, posture trying to catch up with the moment. "Ma'am, Colonel, good afternoon," he stammered. She gave him a single nod. "Who is responsible for information dissemination on base?" Well, that's shared, ma'am," he said, straightening the papers on his desk though none needed straightening. "Shared responsibility is often no responsibility," she replied, gaze moving to the wall-mounted comms board. Half the postings were outdated. One pass-down note referred to an event that had taken place last month. An alert channel code was mislabeled. Emergency drill protocols were pinned behind a calendar instead of in front of it. "Where's your last mass notification test?" she asked. The specialist blinked. "Test, ma'am." She looked back at the captain. When was the last time this base proved it could notify every unit in under 10 minutes? He hesitated. That was enough of an answer. "Within 72 hours, she said. "I want a full-function drill. Every command, every channel, every shift. And I want the confirmation roster in my hands immediately after." "Yes, ma'am," he said, scrambling for a notepad. Her eyes shifted to the specialist. "And you'll be shadowing the coordination." His eyebrows went up. He hadn't expected to be included. "Yes, ma'am." She turned to leave but paused. The first sign of emergency on any base isn't the threat. It's silence in communication. Fix the silence before the threat arrives. She was gone before anyone could reply. From there, she headed to the training wing. The long hallway leading to the simulation rooms still held motivational posters curling at the edges. A pair of junior enlisted troops stood near a vending machine, debating snacks with the intensity of people who'd forgotten what mission focus felt like. When they saw her, their bodies snapped upright fast enough to betray guilt. She didn't stop them. She stopped at the door near them and opened it. Inside, a training bay stood inactive. Rows of unused simulation gear gathered dust on metal shelving. A training schedule pinned to a wall was 3 weeks old. A second lieutenant hurried from an adjacent room, hair slightly unkempt, hands full of folders. "Ma'am, if I'd known you were." "You didn't," she said simply. "That's the point." He froze mid-step. "Who approves your training schedules?" she asked. The department head, ma'am, but we've had some delays with." She walked deeper into the room. "When was your last evaluation rotation?" 4 months ago," he said quietly. "And the last after-action review from a readiness exercise?" He hesitated. "Ma'am, I'd have to check the records." "If you have to check," she said, "you're not leading it." She studied his face, not to assess weakness but to measure capacity. "What would it take," she asked, "to have this facility running at 70% activity within 1 week?" His eyes widened. 70 all rooms, ma'am." "All rooms," she confirmed. "Drills, simulations, joint training, night readiness, cross-unit scheduling. I want to see soldiers here before and after standard duty hours." "I'd need staff," he said honestly. "You'll get them," she replied. "Pick people who want relevance, not convenience." He nodded slowly, the spark of purpose overcoming the weight of habit. "Yes, ma'am." "When you make the schedule," she told him, "do not email it, post it in every barracks, every wing, every command office. Let visibility build pressure." She left him standing among the silent training rigs, pulse restarting around an idea that felt alive. By early evening, the base had begun to whisper. Not rumors, recalibrations. Who saw her where, who she spoke to, what she noticed. No one had yet been punished. That was what unsettled them most. When leaders rely on fear, people hide. When leaders rely on presence, people adjust. She made one more unannounced stop before the day ended, the personnel office. A clerk at the front desk looked half awake behind a computer screen. Stacks of unfiled transfer requests lined the corner of her station. A printer jam light blinked without concern. "Where is your NCOIC?" Sarah asked. The clerk jumped. "A Staff Sergeant Ellison, ma'am, in the back office." "Bring her." The clerk scrambled. Moments later, Ellison emerged, composed but visibly tense. "Ma'am," she said with a salute. Sarah glanced at the cluttered desk. "How many pending transfers are waiting?" 12, ma'am, about half are." "How many overdue counseling packets?" 6, possibly 7, we're still." How many promotion boards missed their window this quarter? The hesitation was brief but not invisible. 2, ma'am. And retention tracking, she asked. Ellison exhaled. Behind, ma'am. We lost 2 admin clerks last month and haven't backfilled. We've been doubling up work. Sarah let the explanation exist without accepting it. Schedule 2-hour corrective blocks every morning at 0700, Sarah said. No walk-ins, no distractions. Catch every file up within 14 days. Yes, ma'am. And every soldier who submitted a transfer request without hearing back will get a personal update, not a form email, a call or a face-to-face. Ellison blinked. Personal, ma'am. You don't lose people because they want to leave, Sarah said. You lose them because no one tried to keep them. The staff sergeant nodded once, throat tight. Sarah started to leave but paused at the door. When you clean up a system, she said quietly, you don't start with the paperwork. You start with the person responsible for it. When she stepped back outside, the light was thinning into evening. The base looked the same to anyone passing through, but not to her. She saw micro-adjustments in body language, in eye contact, in silence. Not fear, calibration. At dusk, she returned briefly to her office, where a slim stack of folders waited on her desk, briefs she'd requested but hadn't yet read. A mug of untouched coffee sat near the corner where she'd left it 6 hours earlier. She didn't sit. Instead, she opened the window. Outside, the flag she'd seen limp and creased that morning now hung straight in the wind. Not because anyone corrected it, but because wind pulled it truthfully. She watched it for a moment. Change doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It arrives in posture, in glances, in the way people start to remember they're accountable to more than routine. She closed the window gently. The day had not been loud. But something had started, if only because no one had stopped it in time. And somewhere on the far end of the base, 2 gate guards who once doubted her authority spent their shift standing straighter without knowing why. Why did the first real pushback come not from the defiant, but from the ones who had survived by staying invisible? By the second morning, people weren't just noticing her, they were trying to predict her. Officers glanced twice down hallways before stepping out. NCOs straightened covers and corrected sleeves they'd ignored the day before. Soldiers cleared clutter without being asked, wiping away the casual mess that had once passed as normal. But change never arrives clean. It drags resistance behind it like a shadow. She expected it. It showed itself first in the form of quiet conversations behind closed doors, the kind spoken in careful tones between men and women who had long ago learned to survive change by waiting it out. If they could stall it, soften it, confuse it, they could keep their comfort intact. She didn't hunt those conversations. She let them breathe. Resistance reveals itself faster when unprovoked. She began the day at the headquarters conference room, where department heads waited with the air of people bracing for orders rather than participating in leadership. They didn't know she could see that in the way they sat. Colonel Richards, still in transition, still cautious, stood near the back, hands clasped loosely. Major Harrison sat at the far end of the table, eyes sharp, pen ready. Others were less engaged, eyes tired, expressions tight, notebooks unopened. She walked to the head of the table and didn't sit. I didn't call this meeting to repeat yesterday, she said. I called it to measure today. Murmurs died. I've visited your spaces, I've seen your people, and I've seen the difference between incompetence and neglect. A few shoulders stiffened. You don't fix failure by yelling at it, she continued. You fix it by exposing where leadership stopped existing. 2 chairs down, a lieutenant colonel shifted with the discomfort of someone who feared blame more than consequence. She turned to him first. Lieutenant Colonel Marks, she said, how many platoons under your command conducted a readiness drill in the last 60 days? He blinked, None formally, ma'am. We've been managing staffing issues and— None, she repeated calmly. Yet your monthly report signed off on full compliance. Marks went silent. She looked around the room. When paperwork lies, culture dies. No more false reporting. If a number is wrong, it'll be wrong on record, and then we fix it. She scanned the group again. Every one of you will submit accurate metrics by 1700 tonight. No retroactive edits. No optimistic padding. Truth only. I'd rather see failure honestly than pretend competence. Nobody spoke. Then she shifted the weight. In 3 days, she said, I want a cross-department briefing on inter-unit communication. Commanders will stand next to senior enlisted leadership and present together. If you haven't spoken to your sergeants before then, it will show. The silence wasn't passive, it was calculating. She dismissed them without ceremony. As they filtered out, Richard stayed behind. Ma'am, he said quietly, some of them won't adapt easily. They don't have to adapt easily, she replied. They just have to adapt. And if they push back, he asked. She didn't answer with words. Her expression made it unnecessary. When she stepped into the hallway, Thompson was waiting. They're rattled, he said. They're supposed to be, she answered. If comfort built this environment, discomfort will dismantle it. From there, she went to the armory. Staff Sergeant Leary, the armorer, was checking serial logs while 2 privates unboxed cleaning kits. The lighting inside was dim, humming overhead, casting long shadows across racks of secured weapons. When Leary saw her, he moved fast. Ma'am, good morning. Her gaze tracked across the racks. Rifles stood in ordered rows, but the tags on some were faded, handwritten, or mismatched by format. An inventory board near the desk held dates in different handwriting, different inks, different levels of care. Who audits your inventory? She asked. I do, ma'am, and the ops officer signs quarterly. And how often are random spot checks done? Leary hesitated. They're not standard procedure here, ma'am, but everything accounted for. Show me the last hand receipt reconciliation, she said. He pulled a clipboard with mild hesitation. She took it, scanned it, then looked back up. This format is outdated by 2 revisions, she said, and 3 serials don't match the log entries. His throat tightened. Ma'am, the records are correct, we just haven't migrated. Migration delays don't explain inconsistency, she said. Update everything by tomorrow morning, and from now on, 2-person verification on every issue and return. Yes, ma'am. She stepped past him to a side storage locker. Open it, she said. He unlocked it carefully. Inside were broken-down weapon parts in unmarked bins and cleaning solvents stored next to field optic lenses. No separation, no labeling, just habit. She didn't sigh, she didn't shake her head. You'll reorganize this space entirely, she said. Labeling, segregation, secure disposal for unserviceable parts. Submit a layout proposal to Thompson by 2000. Yes, ma'am, he said, voice steadying. She left the armory and moved toward the obstacle course training grounds. Wind carried faint grit across the dirt track. The rope-climbed towers netting sagged near the top. A wooden wall obstacle had a crack running down one side from water rot and time. A group of soldiers was jogging the perimeter trail nearby. Their formation was loose, breathing uneven. One was quietly lagging, but no one corrected him, not even the sergeant jogging a few paces ahead. Sarah watched. They saw her late. The sergeant called group halt, and the unit scattered toward a shaky line. Continue, she said, stepping past them. The sergeant called cadence again, voice suddenly louder, chest suddenly higher. The lagging soldier picked up pace, shame forcing his lungs ahead. She didn't turn. She headed toward the admin wing next, where a different kind of resistance waited. She didn't need to search for it, it found her. As she passed a row of open office doors, she heard voices behind one. Not loud, not disrespectful, but defensive. "I'm telling you, she's here to burn the place down so she can rebuild it however she wants." One voice said, male, probably in his early 40s. Another voice responded lower. "She'll calm down once she sees how much we're dealing with." They all do. A third voice added, "She'll be gone in a year. We just need to not get caught in the storm." She didn't change her stride. She stopped at the open door. Inside, 3 officers looked up, color draining from each face one shade at a time. A coffee mug froze halfway to a mouth. A keyboard clacked once under the accidental weight of a dropped hand. She stepped inside without invitation. The air shifted. She looked at each of them, not slowly, not harshly, just long enough to mark them with attention. "What you build while I'm here," she said quietly, "will decide how you serve when I'm gone." No one exhaled. "There is no storm coming," she continued. "The storm already hit. You've just been living in the wreckage long enough to call it normal." Her voice wasn't raised, but the truth in it left no room for shielding. "If your plan is to wait me out," she said, "don't get comfortable. I don't lead on a clock. I lead until systems no longer need me to hold them up." She turned to leave, then paused at their threshold. "And if the next time you speak about rebuilding, you do it in this tone," she added, "make sure you speak loudly enough for me to join the conversation." She left before they could respond. In the hallway, a junior airman passing her flattened himself against the wall to let her through without being asked. The message was spreading, not by threat, but by the absence of tolerance. She stepped outside into the late morning air. Beyond the headquarters buildings, sunlight flashed off the roof of the gatehouse in the distance, the same one that had once failed to recognize her arrival. 2 guards stood there now. Even from afar, she could see the difference in how they held their ground. Change wasn't coming someday. It had already arrived. And the base was only just starting to understand that survival wouldn't depend on avoiding it, but on choosing whether to grow under it or be replaced by those who would. When does resistance become more dangerous? Not in what is said aloud, but in the silence that follows obedience. By the 3rd morning, the whispers had changed shape. People were no longer asking who she was. They were asking who might be next to stand in her path and get crushed beneath her expectations. They didn't yet understand she wasn't here to break individuals. She was here to break patterns. Some feared her. Some resented her. A few, very few, were starting to believe in her. But belief is quiet at first. It watches. It tests. And sometimes it comes from places least expected. Her first stop that morning wasn't on the schedule. She went to the barracks, not the polished officer halls, where floors got waxed because rank walked past them, but the enlisted wings where long nights and cramped lockers built the kind of weariness no inspection board ever measured. She stepped inside before sunrise. The duty NCO at the front desk nearly knocked over his chair trying to stand. He was young, too new to have good instincts, too aware to be careless. "Ma'am." "Carry on," she said, glancing at the duty log. The penmanship was sloppy, half the entries incomplete, a line or two left blank from hours they'd simply skipped. She said nothing. Instead, she moved deeper into the hallway, where low voices and clanging metal hinted at soldiers pulling on boots and fastening belts. No one expects a colonel in the barracks at 5:40. She didn't enter any rooms. She just moved through the corridor slowly, scanning details. The crooked nameplates, the chipped paint near door edges, the scuffed tile that hadn't seen a mop in days. A door cracked open ahead of her, and a soldier stepped out tying his boots as he walked. He was still blinking sleep from his eyes when he nearly collided with her. He froze. She just looked at him. He swallowed, squared himself, and spoke softly, "Ma'am." She gave a single nod, nothing more. He disappeared back into the room like he'd just crossed a minefield and somehow survived. She reached the end of the hallway and exited through a side door. She didn't need to stop anyone. Her presence had already done the work. From there, she moved toward the operations building, the one place on base where tempo is supposed to live, even when everything else slows to a crawl. Inside, Captain Rowe, recently assigned to scheduling, sat at a desk littered with calendars and half-printed forms. He straightened when she entered, though she hadn't even made a sound. "Ma'am, can I?" "Where are the last 30 days of personnel rotation rosters?" she asked. He gestured to a cabinet, "Filed by unit, ma'am." She went to it, opened the top drawer. Folders jammed at angles, some missing, some mislabeled. One was empty except for a post-it note that read pending. She picked it up and held his eyes. "Pending isn't a system," she said. He swallowed. "We're behind on updates, but I've got 2 soldiers." "Behind stops today," she interrupted. "You'll have a compiled master roster by 1800, and every unit commander gets a copy before close of business." He nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." "And your 2 soldiers?" she asked. "They're splitting the work with." "They aren't splitting it with anything," she said. "No additional tasks until it's complete." He nodded again, this time slower. She left without waiting for further assurance. By mid-morning, she was outside again, crossing the lot toward the logistics hangar. The air smelled faintly of dust and fuel, and a forklift sat idle near a stack of pallets that hadn't been moved in days. Supply clerks moved inside with the sluggish rhythm of people who'd long stopped believing urgency was real. She stepped into the loading bay, just as 2 corporals were arguing over an inventory sheet. They froze at the sight of her. "Which of you tracked last week's materiel distribution?" she asked. One of them, taller, bony shoulders under a uniform just slightly too large, answered, "I did, ma'am." She held out her hand. He looked confused, then understood. He placed the clipboard into her palm. She scanned the figures. Lines crossed out, numbers rewritten, annotations without initials or dates. "Where is the documentation for outgoing hardware?" she asked. The second corporal stepped in. "We were going to update the log when someone asked," she finished. He shut his mouth. "You'll re-enter every line into a fresh record," she said. "Digital and hard copy, and you'll timestamp everything you backfill." "Yes, ma'am." She turned to leave, then added, "If someone asks you why, don't blame my rank. Blame your habits." She walked out before their fear could settle into excuses. By noon, resistance had begun to reorganize. Not out loud, not in confrontation, in stillness. People didn't argue. They complied, but with the silent calculation of those waiting to see if she'd exhaust herself before they had to change anything. She could feel it in how voices softened when she passed, not out of respect, but strategy. She could see it in the eyes of officers who answered her directly, then whispered about her when she left the room. She could hear it in the way NCOs repeated her orders to their people, but without conviction, like instructions printed on paper that would eventually blow away if no one pinned them down. That kind of resistance is harder to fight than defiance. Defiance declares itself, silence delays you. That afternoon, she sought out Thompson. He met her outside the headquarters building, where the flag hung clean, where the walkway had been swept since the day before, where soldiers crossing the courtyard paused to acknowledge her. "Walk with me," she said. He matched her stride without question. "I want to know which of your senior NCOs are pretending to comply," she said. He didn't bristle, he nodded once. "There are a few," he admitted. "Ones who think they can ride this out until you rotate out or shift focus." "And will they?" she asked. "For a while," he said honestly. "People here learned how to survive leadership changes by outlasting them. They don't think this one is different yet." She stopped walking. They stood near the memorial wall, a stone slab etched with names from decades-old conflicts. The kind of wall people walk past without reading, because memory fades when not demanded. She looked at the names a moment before speaking. "We're not waiting for them to believe," she said. "We're going to move so fast belief has to catch up." Thompson gave a rare small smile. "Some of them will break before they follow. Then they'll be replaced by those who already care," she said simply. Silence passed, not empty but aligned. "Start watching for the quiet ones," she said. "The soldiers who correct mistakes before anyone tells them to. The sergeants who stay late without announcing it. The specialists who take charge when their corporals don't." Thompson listened. "They're the ones this place will rebuild around," she said. "Not the loud, not the comfortable, the capable." She looked back toward the buildings. "Tonight I'll send you 3 names," she said. "I want you to observe them, not approach them. If I'm right about them, we'll elevate them before their current chains of command realize what happened." He nodded. "And the ones holding the floor down?" he asked. "We don't break them yet," she said. "We make them watch someone else rise." He breathed out once, like her strategy aligned with something he'd once believed before it was beaten out of him by attrition. As the afternoon waned, she continued walking the base. Past the admin buildings, where blinds were straightened now without prompting. Past the motor pool where mechanics suddenly worked with purpose instead of waiting for instruction. Past the training yard, where the same struggling soldier from earlier now kept pace, not because he'd gained strength, but because the sergeant beside him had started doing his job. By early evening, she stopped at the gate. The same gate. The same post where she'd been stopped days ago, dismissed, doubted, and delayed. But not by the same men. Specialist Johnson, no longer private, stood at attention when she approached. His posture was a declaration without words. His partner, Williams, maintained his stance with equal